Smart Talks podcast with Benjamin
and Cassidy, and today we're talking about tipping services. And I think that's typically an American thing where we tip for basically everything. It's not just dining services. Like, for example, I tip my hairdresser.
Right.
And, she does a good job. She does something I know I can't do. Because if I try to do, like, what she does to my hair, I would burn it all off. So I tip her for that. Dog groomers get tipped. Tattoo artists, piercings, people who do piercings. I mean, we tip for everything. Like, even if you're getting your food to go, sometimes you tip the hostess.
Yeah, there's a lot of times where we tip where it's almost unnecessary, or we're tipping just because it's expected, not because it's proper or the person earned it or anything of the sort. It's just because it's been ingrained in us so much that you have to leave a tip, or more or less you have to be willing to leave a tip.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I work in an animal hospital, and one time all we did was trim a dog's nails. I was like, okay, here's a tip, and I was like, we actually get paid, but thank you.
Yeah, but I think that's a great intro, though, into what we're talking about is, like, as far as tipping service go. Why do we tip, right? Like you said at the beginning, it's probably just an American thing, but I feel like there's tipping going around the world, at least in some form or way. It's just, in other countries, like in Japan, for instance, it's frowned upon to get tips because you're telling the person who's serving you, I'm judging your performance.
Yeah, and that's exactly what a tip is.
Right. But in other cultures, it's deemed inappropriate or bad in the sense that you are taking it upon yourself to judge them on their performance when they should be meeting a set of standards at all points in time during their job.
Like, I think, too, I remember in Spanish class, I'm pretty sure it's in Spain, where the closest thing you get to a tip is you just let them keep the change.
Right.
Which, I mean, I'm fine with that,
But I think that really doesn't quite cover why we tip, right? We know there's the notion of tipping, why we do all these other things. But a lot of the times when we tip, especially in the food industry, it's because servers, hostesses, they don't get paid full or minimum wage.
They really don't. Like, I remember when I worked at a fish camp with my sister, I was just a waitress helper / hostess, so I didn't really get tips, but she was a server. And she made, like, their actual wage is like maybe $2. And even better, their tips get taxed. So I think it was one night we had a super busy night. She got really great tips. Her next paycheck was negative because her tips were taxed that much.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
To get a negative paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just because
good job this week. Tips. Give us $20.
And that's just because she had tips.
Yeah.
So why do you think that is? Like, why do you think servers or people who work for tips or people who need tips in order to make a wage or a living, why do you think that they get underpaid so much and it's considered within the law, right? Because law states you have to have a minimum wage, right? So why is it that restaurants and other places can get away with paying people $3 to $4, so 50% of most minimum wages, and yet they can't make a living unless they're getting tips?
Okay, I just looked it up because I didn't really know the answer. It said it's called a tipped minimum wage, which is $2.13 an hour.
$2.13 an hour?
Yeah. Even if tips don't make up that difference, waiters will still make no less than federal minimum wage because they have to pay the rest legally.
Right. So restaurants are or not just restaurants in general, but people who formulate around the idea of tips or formulate the business around the idea of tips, what they're relying on is that the waiter or waitress, the person who's serving you in any form or way, is going to receive enough tips to where they don't have to pay them anything out of pocket. And they can maintain paying them this bare minimum $2.13.
Yeah, how can I put more money into my pocket by not having to pay my workers? It's a very capitalist thing to do, which is why it's probably so popular in America. Which I'm not saying anything against capitalism. I'm just saying that that's what's going on in our world, or in our country, at least.
Right.
And I don't know. I guess because it's ingrained in my mind, I feel bad if I can't leave at least a 15% tip. Right. Even if that person, wasn't really the best. Like that time we went to that wings place and she literally threw the check at us.
Yeah.
Like, I understand you're busy, but like, place it.
You have a better soft spot in your heart than I do about this because you actually worked in the service industry.
Yeah.
Whereas I've never really been anything as far as like a server, hostess, or host in this case, I guess.
Yeah.
So I don't really know quite the bounds that some of these people have to go through when they're working long hours or anything of the sort.
Mm-hmm.
So you're more willing to leave a tip than I am. Now, with that being said, going back to what we were saying, a tip is an evaluation of someone's service, but in America, it's almost an obligation to tip at times.
Yeah.
You almost feel obliged to tip, or else you're considered a bad customer.
Yeah.
Which, in its own right, is a problem.
I think so.
It's wrong to expect your customer to tip you at every point in time, especially when you're doing your job. And this is my perspective, right? And again, this is where you and I are going to differ a little bit on this, because again, you have experience in this industry. I do not.
Yeah.
In my mind, why should I pay you extra for doing the job you were hired to do?
I mean, to an extent, I completely understand that. However, servers aren't really treated the best, especially by some of the customers.
Absolutely, and there are definitely customers who are horrible. But I'm talking for your average customer who's not there to make a problem for you, who's not going to leave any huge mess behind, who's not going to, bother you the entire night. Just your typical average customer. Why should they tip you more if you're doing the job you were hired to do and you're not going above and beyond?
Because otherwise we wouldn't get any money.
Right, but people don't know that. And I didn't know that until not too long ago that you guys were...
when I told you.
Yeah, like, it dawned on me. It was like, oh, okay, that's probably why they're so adamant about tips.
Yeah.
It's because you're making $2.13 an hour from the company that you're working for because they're basing your salary on your potential income from tips.
Yeah.
That's problematic to me, right? If you... Now, granted, I understand why businesses do this, right? From a logistics standpoint, if you have enough servers that are bringing in enough tips to cover at least minimum wage, you can hire a lot of people for $2.13 an hour.
Yeah.
Right? If you, let's just round down to 2 and round up to 8. So let's say $8 is the minimum wage on average. I don't know if that's true or not. We're just going to say that is, right? If the minimum wage for tip-based industry is $2, you can hire 4 people for every one person that another person can hire.
Yeah.
Right? But that's assuming that you don't have to make up the difference at any point in time.
Yeah.
So I understand why they do that, because it's better for your ability to hire. You can get more people in. You can have more staff. You can have greater capacity of things flowing. But there are very glaring issues.
Yeah. Such as if you have, a slow week where you don't get as much business, your servers don't get enough tips to actually meet the requirement of minimum wage, and you have to make up for it after a bad week where you didn't bring in enough money yourself. So then they're like, well, I guess we gotta let someone go. And then the next week they'll be booming, and then the servers will get mad because you just fired someone and they're too busy.
Right.
It's a nasty scale that's never balanced.
So I guess this brings me to my question of what's the point in general of tipping, right? When, yes, there are glaring issues when it comes to salary for the host, hostess, servers, whatever it may be. If we increased their payment and got rid of the whole tip thing in general and brought them up to minimum wage, yes, you'd have less people working in some of the industries. That is true. However, there are some cases where that would be more beneficial because you'd have a more stable income, right?
Yeah.
You'd have a guaranteed salary, and any tips you received at that point is just icing on the cake.
Yeah.
Right. Now, granted, there are cases like you were saying where people do get taxed for the tips and whatnot, and there are some places I know where if you get a tip, it's put into like a safe or a jar or whatever you want to call it, and at the end of the shift, it's split up amongst all servers. And I don't agree with that either.
Yeah,
I think that's kind of problematic in its own right. But if you brought them up the minimum wage, any tips they got just adds more to their income at the end. However, with that being said, I guess the opposite argument to that is, well, if you brought them up to minimum wage, people are less inclined to tip if they know that.
Yeah.
Because they know they're getting paid a normal wage at that point.
That's why I tip, is because I know they're not getting paid enough.
Right. And I guess that's part of my thing where I try to tip. It's never a lot. It's usually no more than 10% in a lot of cases because I don't feel like the server did anything that was extraordinary or made my service any more pleasurable than it is on normal. But the few times I've had good service, I leave 25-30% tips.
Yeah.
Right? And the few times I've had bad service, I've left no tips at all. And I think that's justified in the sense of how you're treated as a customer, but then you also got to look at it like this, right? If I don't give you a tip, you've now only made $2.13. If I'm at a restaurant for an hour, you've only made $2.13 off my table.
Yeah. But if you actually, paid your servers at least minimum wage, yes, you would have to increase the overall prices, but people are like, oh, I don't have to spend more on a tip, and I think it would be overlooked.
Right, and people in general, I feel like if you put more money in their pockets, are more inclined to tip in general.
Yeah.
Right? And oftentimes, there was a study that was done about this. People are going to tip regardless of service, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not quite sure. I think this goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, where it's just based on the expectation of tips, where you don't want to be seen as a penny pinching or stingy, or you don't want to be listed as a bad customer or something of the sort. So I think there are stereotypes, I guess would be a good word.
Yeah.
Where you expect an expectation of you to do something, even though the person may or may not have earned it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I guess because I did work in the food industry, even if I do get like kind of a bad service, it's like, oh, maybe the person who was here before me was mean and just put him or her in a bad mood.
Right.
And maybe me putting like a tip in his smiley face or maybe brighten their day a little.
Yeah, maybe. Now, I'm going to stick with the argument of if we increase the servers' wages, we shouldn't tip them at all.
Yeah. And I think they should get increased wages. And if somebody feels inclined to tip, yeah, icing on the cake. But I don't think that they need to rely completely on that.
Yeah, and I think it's problematic especially when you start off like small restaurants. It's not that big a deal when you're spending like $20 for a meal. You throw in about $4, $5 a tip, and most of the time people are fine with that because it's a cheap meal. Throw in $5, that's 25%. You're done.
Yeah.
Right, but when you start getting up into the upper echelon of restaurants or businesses where they're expecting a tip for everything they do, and your bill is already up in the hundreds at that point. Yeah. 20% once you're in the hundreds of dollars adds up very quickly.
It does.
And I think that's part of the problem, right? Going back to where I'm going to put my foot in the sand is if we just gave them a normal wage, even if it's a little bit more than minimum wage, even if it's minimum wage, that would negate the liability of them having to rely on receiving a tip.
Yeah.
Now, with that being said, there's a clear drawback. If you don't have an incentive for people to go above and beyond in the workplace, especially in a service industry, you're going to get worse servers because they're not as inclined to work as hard for tips. But the offset to that is if they're not inclined to work so hard for tips, you're more than likely going to have more people who are apt for the industry because they're more willing to work in that industry because they know it's a livable wage at that point. It's a job they want.
That's the thing. Like, I didn't mind working in a restaurant scene. Like, yeah, it was kind of stressful, but I made friends. A lot of the regulars were really nice. Some of the older people tried to set me up with their grandsons. I always thought that was funny. But, I mean, it's, depending on where you go, it can be a very nice place to work. And that's why the wage is such an issue, because you're like, I want to work, I want to stay working here, but I can't afford rent, or I can't afford to pay off my car. That's the thing. Like, most people who are working in the food industry, it's usually like a young teenager saving up for college, someone in college just trying to make sure they can get to the next semester, or someone who's getting a second job just because they need the money. So they need the money, so why not pay them? Because I know I'm more inclined to work when I know I'm actually going to get paid.
Right.
And this is someone who was an intern for almost a year.
Right, and
unpaid intern.
But no, and you're absolutely right. I think if you're willing to pay someone a better salary, they're more willing to work in better quality standards, right? The high, like for instance, if you pay me minimum wage for a dirt job, I'm not going to put forth my best foot.
Mm-mm.
However, if you pay me, let's say, a little bit more than minimum wage, let's say $1 more than minimum wage, right? Now I'm more inclined because I have more of an incentive. And the more you add on to that, the more incentive I have to work harder to try to keep that job.
Yeah.
Right? That's why when you get into these higher paying jobs and businesses, there's a lot of people who stay because they have an incentive to stay.
Yeah.
And I think that couldn't be more true for the service industry, especially when it comes to tipping. Because think about the turnover rate for restaurants alone.
Oh, it's high.
Right? And if you gave anyone a livable minimum wage, do you know how many people would stick around?
I think a good amount.
I mean, again, you have more insight to this than I do because I've never been in the service industry.
I mean, I probably wouldn't stay in the place where I worked as a restaurant just because it was a little hole-in-the-wall place. I mean, yeah, it was really nice, friendly environment. But that was not my end game.
Yeah, and of course there's always something. Now, with that being said, I did say I put my foot in the sand and say we shouldn't tip if we gave them actual wages.
Yeah.
Right? However, like you said, people are nice. People are more inclined to tip if they don't have the expectation of it. Right? I know when someone asks me for a tip or indicates they should receive a tip, I am less likely to give it to them. However, if someone just says, I hope you have a nice day, and then they hand me the check, I'm more inclined to give them a tip because they're not asking for it, they're not begging for it, they're not making it obvious that they need or want it.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that goes for that. But on the opposite side, why we should tip is like we were saying at the beginning. You're making $2.13 an hour, you need the compensation somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? Now, with that also is, if you're getting tipped well, you can sometimes make a lot more money than minimum wage.
That is true.
There are some days, like I have friends who've brought on $500-$600 in a week just from tips alone.
As servers?
Yes.
I was going to say, because you have some interesting friends.
Well, no. The people I'm referring to are definitely in the service business. Those people, they bring home their money in other ways. We won't get into that.
But yeah, I think we should tip just to help those people get over that hump because, like I said, the people who are working those kinds of jobs need the money and they don't have the time for a full-time job.
Most of the time, yeah. Not many people do. Especially if you're trying to balance it with school or some kind of other thing that you're trying to do. Like, for instance, I know for me, it's very hard to do school and jobs.
Yeah, I don't know how I did it. I really don't.
Look, I give all my power to you and people who work while going to school at the same time. It is something that's very hard for me to do, if not impossible. I don't know why. I just can't split my brain for up to 16 hours a day like that.
Yeah, like I think it was 2 semesters ago, I was taking 3 lab classes, one of which was a 400 level. One of them was genetics, which was known for breaking people. The other one was human anatomy, which wasn't too hard, but it was still a lot. And then I was interning and tutoring at a different school.
Yeah, and you did a lot, right? And your day at that point in time would be consisted of anywhere from a 12 to 16 hour day. Mm-hmm. And that's not including anything you had to do when you got home.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas it was almost strictly school stuff, and I had a much easier time. Mm-hmm. But with that being said, I had all my attention focused into one thing versus 3 different things.
Yeah. I'm never doing that again.
I mean, it's difficult, right? And of course, people who work part-time jobs generally need the money, like you're saying, but they also don't have time for full-time. It's very hard to work a full-time job and be a full-time student or be a full-time parent or be a full-time whatever it is you need to be.
Yeah.
It's extremely difficult to balance all that time.
It really is. So, and it's not just the food industry that we tip, of course. Like I said, I tip my hairdresser.
Right.
Because, she's really nice. We talk about our dogs and... sometimes when you go get your hair done, they kind of like push conversation. She doesn't really do that. She lets me kind of have my moments to kind of go back into myself because I'm very introverted. And sometimes you just kind of talk to me. Then we have a little conversation. Doors closed. Let me reboot. Then we'll go back. And she seems to know like how long it takes for me to reboot too.
Right. And I think there are a lot of times where the expectation of tipping is thrown out the window for certain things, right? When I go to get my car serviced by a mechanic or something, I don't feel inclined to tip because, like we said, or at least like I said at the beginning, it's his job. I bring my car to him because there's something wrong with my car. He fixes my car. We go about our day. I pay whatever absurd amount of money it is for whatever part he needed, and then we move on.
But you also pay for the labor because you can check the bill. You have
parts and labor.
Yeah, exactly.
But almost every place I've ever been, no matter if it's a parts and labor situation or if it's just simple service or anything, every time I receive a receipt or something to sign off on, at the very bottom is always tip, and there's a blank spot. Even if it's something like, for instance, some restaurants, you pay before you get your food.
Really?
Yeah, like you'll go up, you'll walk in, you'll pay, you'll order what you want, you pay, and then you go sit down and they'll bring your food to you.
Oh, yeah.
Like Miggs and some of the other places here. Right. So when you do those kind of things, you still get a little tab at the bottom that says tip, but they haven't done anything for you.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's not like you have a server in those scenarios, because what you do is you go sit down, someone brings you your food, and that's it. They leave.
Yeah.
They bring your food, they leave. So what have they done? They brought you your food. So in those situations, it's still the same thing as restaurants and stuff. But you're not tipping them, even though they're still providing a service to you.
I mean, I think I think there's more to being a server than just bringing food. You know, you have to check on them, see if they need anything.
Of course, and occasionally
whatever they're drinking from.
Right, and occasionally that does happen, but it's not because you pay up front, and the only expectation of a restaurant that's set up in that style is you get your food, the server comes back once to check on your drinks, and then you're generally finished and you leave. Right? You don't tip in those scenarios. So I just think it's funny to me to think that in some scenarios it's perfectly okay to tip and it's expected to tip, but other scenarios with similar services, if not more intensive services, we're less likely to tip. We're not obliged to tip.
I think I'm going to ironically say favorite. My favorite thing that ever happens is, I'm not going to leave you a tip. It took my food too long to get here. Like, how is that a reflection on me? I'm not the one back there cooking your food.
Yeah, I never did understand that as a...
It's because, like, the servers, they're the face that you always see.
Yeah, and I understand that, right? I guess because I think of it from more of a practical standpoint, there's only so much the server can do. They can refill my drink, they can bring me my food, they can make sure I have enough napkins, they can check on me to make sure my food tastes fine, or whatever it may be. But they're not the one doing anything else.
People don't think about that.
But, you know, it's always funny, though, when even if my food's late or it's taking a little bit longer, whenever the server will come out to the table and say,
they're the ones who have to apologize.
Yeah, and I always look at them and say, look, it's not a problem, I understand. Now, sometimes I do get a little frustrated, and I say, hey, do you know when our food will be ready? And they'll typically go, you know what, I'll go check on that right now. They go check on it, they come back to tell you everything's good, right? Where I have a problem at, when it comes to servers in that scenario, is when my food's taking forever and they haven't been to my table to inform me what's taking so long, or just check on me in general for almost 30 plus minutes at that point. Yeah. Then I start getting irritated and problems start arising, right? But when it's, hey, just come tell me to let you know food's going to be a little late, or hey, it's been 15 minutes since I ordered. What's going on? Oh, the kitchen's running a little behind. I always feel more willing to wait and be accepting of those answers than
because you're empathetic.
Yeah, I'm empathetic to a degree, but when it comes down to individual service where I'm expecting some level of, I don't know, service, it starts getting a little frustrating. Yeah.
Like that one day I was on my lunch break for work, and I guess she got pulled aside because she just kind of disappeared with my card when I was trying to pay the check.
Yeah, I've had that happen too before. There was a restaurant I went to where our meal was okay, and I was going to leave an okay tip. But then I gave them my card to pay, and they didn't come back for almost 20 minutes. Yeah. I got very upset, and I think most people would in that scenario. Yeah. Where someone has just walked off with your credit card, and they haven't came back for almost 20 minutes.
And when that happened to me, with everything going on, a lot of restaurants at half capacity. They were at half capacity. I was like, Are you that busy with DoorDash, maybe?
Yeah, there's, especially with right now with everything going on, I'm definitely more empathetic to time and whatnot.
Yeah.
And again, there are benefits to everything. There's pros and cons to everything.
Mm-hmm.
Tipping in particular, there's a lot of issues with why we do it versus why we don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
As far as tipping goes, 50-50. Yes, I think it's an evaluation of your service.
But they shouldn't have to live off of it.
Yeah, they shouldn't have to live off of it. I think if I'm tipping you, it's because you've impressed me.
Yeah.
And you're getting extra for doing a great job.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I don't think you should be relying on me to tip no matter what in order to make a living, a wage.
Yeah.
And same goes for the flip side, though. If you're making that kind of wage, or even if you're not, if you're a horrible person to me, you shouldn't expect me to tip at all.
Oh,
or if you've ruined my service or my experience at that point in time, you shouldn't expect a tip. If you do get one, you should expect a very small one because you've openly, whatever it may be. Like, for instance, that one girl that was serving us at the wing place that you mentioned, who literally threw the check at us.
Yeah.
And she disappeared at one point for 30 plus minutes.
Disappearing.
And it's like at a certain point, personal responsibility has to kick in, and we have to say, all right, look, you weren't good at your job for this particular point in time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to reward you with anything as a result.
Yeah.
Right? And I always feel bad when I do that because after figuring out, the whole, they don't make actual minimum wage, they make tipping minimum wage. I feel more obliged to, but at the same time, if they're being crappy to me, it's like, why should I give you anything?
Yeah, and I understand that. Like you said, like if they don't rely on tips, then there is more leeway to slack off. But I mean, if they're slacking off, I would just not hire. I just fire them. Like, hey, this isn't working. We're gonna have to let you go. You're making my restaurant look bad, and I don't appreciate it. So either step up or leave.
Right, but again, I think this all gets solved if you just change it to a minimum wage, and then any tips they get is just additional income.
Yeah.
Right, because I think if someone's working knowing they have a stable income, they're more willing to work, they're more happy to work, they have higher expectations at the workplace because you can do that saying, hey, look, I'm not paying you this, but hey, I'm giving you a minimum wage, and any tips you get, that's just extra for you.
Exactly.
It makes people go, oh, wait, this is the place I want to be, this is the place I want to work. And I think there are some places that probably do that. It wouldn't surprise me if there were.
Yeah.
But it's few and far between.
It really is.
I know way too many places that it's, like you were saying, tipping minimum wage. And I didn't realize how low it was until you mentioned it to me. I knew it was lower, but I didn't think it was
that much
a fourth
lower.
And sometimes a fifth, depending on what state or whatever it is you may be in. It's a little ridiculous.
It really is.
And I think you should tip your servers not because you feel obligated to, but because they need it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, servers don't have the right to treat you as a customer horribly, and if they do, you shouldn't feel inclined to tip either way.
Yeah. See, like, even if they're just mediocre, I still give at least 15% as long as I'm able to. If they're better, then of course it goes higher. If they're being kind of nasty to me, I'm like, 10.
But again, you're much nicer about tipping than I am.
Yeah.
And
because I've been there.
You've been there. You have more empathy for them because you've been in their spot.
Yeah.
I have not. So it's a little harder for me to empathize and relate to it because I've never been in that scenario.
Exactly.
Right. So as a whole, I think we're in agreement to some points where tipping's good. We should do it if we can.
Yeah.
But there are clear workarounds that we wouldn't have to always tip no matter what. And if we were to tip, it'd just be more beneficial for the server overall.
Mm-hmm. That's, like I said about, hairdressers, dog groomers. They get paid.
Yes.
But we still tip them.
Right.
Like, I was watching someone on YouTube. They're like, I used to take my dog to the groomer, and I had to DIY it. I should tip her more. But, what do you think about tipping the services for people who do get paid?
Again, that goes back to what I've pretty much been reiterating like a broken record.
Yeah.
Is if they do an average job,
Yeah.
they get paid what they get paid. However, if they go above and beyond and make my experience great or their service is outstanding or whatever it may be, I will leave a tip.
Yeah.
Right? If the person who does my hair, I always leave her a tip. Why? Because she does a great job. She keeps me entertained.
Yeah.
The service is never bad. And I'm never disappointed with the product.
Yeah.
I can't say the same for other services. There are times where I've gotten a product from a store, let's say, and I'm very disappointed in the service I got when trying to get the product, when trying to buy the product, and when trying to return the product. So I've said, screw it, I'm not leaving you a tip.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people in retail don't have to rely on tips.
I know, but I'm just using that as an,
I know.
not necessarily retail, but I'm just using that as an example where there are times where people who get paid do need to get tips because they've gone above and beyond what was expected of them, or they've done a superior job compared to their competitors or something like that.
Yeah.
I'm all for giving tips at that point because you've earned it. You've made your mark and you've told me, yes, I want to keep you as a customer and I'm more willing to pay you because of that. However, if you flip side that into people who are expecting tips or doing average jobs, I'm not as inclined to tip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I genuinely think that everyone in this, at least in the US, needs to work in food service or in retail at least one point in their life, just so they get that empathy for those kind of workers. Because I've worked in both food industry and retail. I've been mistreated by people where I didn't deserve to be mistreated. Like, why don't you have this product? I was like, that's up to corporate. That's not my problem. I can help you order it online, and it's free delivery if you order it in store. I don't want that. Oh, bye. Sorry, there's nothing I can do.
Look, you're better than I. I would not have a job very much longer. That's probably the reason why I haven't worked in retail or food.
Yeah.
I'm not too good with people doing that kind of stuff, but nonetheless, I think.
And I think it helps for jobs later in life, like, you know.
Right. I mean, and it's good, valuable customer service. I
Yeah.
think, and like just dealing with people in general, it's a good. It's a good experience for that,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're trying to go into anything that deals with a lot of people on a regular basis anyway.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to get those nasty people who are just
Oh, yeah.
Horrible no matter what, and it's good experience because you're like, okay, I've already been exposed to someone like this. I kind of know how to handle it. I kind of know what to expect already, so it's not going to hurt my feelings. It's not going to make me feel bad. It's not going to make me do any of these odd or out of the ordinary things.
Yeah, like, I think it's extremely helpful because no matter where I am in my job, I have to deal with those kinds of people. Like, if my dog's getting medicine, do I still have to pay for the exam? Yes.
All right.
I have gotten that question.
Well, I think we're starting to rabble on a little bit, so I
Yeah.
think this is a good place to wrap it up.
I think so too.
All right. Well, thank you guys and gals for listening to the Dumb Thoughts, Smart Talks podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for hanging out with us.